I don't get to see many. I think that's probably why I actually have 4 passports, because I'm not welcome in any country. So I travel around. I actually make wine in 6 countries, and which is actually a bit of a break for me, because when I was chief winemaker for Adelaide, it was 8 countries. But in each of those 6 countries, we grow Sauvignon Blanc. So we're going to talk about 4 of them today. Except for one, I had a hand in all of them. I sort of never know what I'm going to talk about till I get up here and stand and hear what the previous speaker said. Unfortunately, I wasn't here earlier, and I have to be cautious about what I say, because Mike Trout's here, and he's a real Kiwi, and I left New Zealand, and I've actually been out of the country more than half my life now. So I left New Zealand 28 years ago, and came to California. I was a winemaker at Simi for 14 years, and then part of the Constellation group, the nasty piece of the Constellation when we were buying. And then I went to Allied Domecq and Jim Beam, and then it was back to Constellation, and that's when I executed my parachute. This time the parachute didn't open on impact, and so I was able to leave. So if you've got any questions as we go through this, please feel free to sing out. I'm going to skip back a few slides here, because I want to have a bit of a laugh with you guys. I've been working in Chile since 1988. So when we first making wine in Chile, we had no electricity. We didn't have any cars. We rode horses. I had the first car in town, and that was a bit of a thrill at the time. And then, of course, that was when Pinochet was in power, and I've been tear-gassed, rubber bulleted. I've had guns in my back during the junta in Argentina, and then obviously I've just been witness to the earthquakes in Chile. So I wasn't there for the 8.8, but I was there for the 6.9, the 5.8, the 5.4. But the joke about Chile is you'll notice this number's missing. And that's because in Chile, if you want the real thing, you've got to say it twice. Anyone from Chile? Anyone been to Chile? All right, a few of you. So you know when you stop at the Copec to get a cup of coffee, the local gas station, you have to say cafe, cafe. If you say that, you'll get an espresso. If you just say cafe, you get an Nescafe. If you want Merlot, you have to say Merlot, Merlot. If you say Merlot once, you get Carmenere. If you want Sauvignon Blanc, you have to say Savvy, Savvy. Or else you get Sauvignon Vert, Sauvignon Americana, Sauvignon Arce, or anything else that happens to have a green leaf and puts a little bit of pyrazine in it. So I jokingly left this out because it's actually, if whatever number I put up there, it wouldn't be accurate anyway. The other thing is, you'll also notice that I talked in hectares here and I put tons here. I actually multitasked here so that you could, if some of you are feeling more in the metric, you would feel comfortable, and if you wanted to talk about tons, you could feel comfortable there too. But it's the one thing I will say in Chile, and we'll talk about that first, is that in the last 2 years we've planted 2,000 hectares of Sauvignon Blanc, and my cost of goods in Chile are about $19. You think the recession has hit the wine industry? We ain't seen yet. Hate to tell you. Lucky for the earthquake wiped out the glass plant in Chile, and so our dry goods have gone up 20%. But anyway, we're in for a shock when these new vintages come out, and they're great vintages. Anyway, this is Chile, and more specifically, Santiago. You know what? This map is not correct, because Santiago moved 2 meters during the earthquake. And Buenos Aires, they left off Buenos Aires. Oh, there it is. Buenos Aires moved 80 centimeters. Rio moved 20 centimeters. GPS doesn't work in Chile anymore. This whole continent moved. Chile actually became bigger because the Pacific plate went underneath the South American plate. And even though the whole continent moved in this direction, the country actually got bigger. They picked up 80 centimetres of coastline. Anyone been in an 8.8 earthquake? A friend of mine's holding his wall with his young baby in his hand, and even though he's leaning on the wall of his house, he can't keep his hand on the wall. The walls are moving so fast. And the earthquake lasted 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Everybody thought the world was cracking. You got no idea. I've got photos of, if you go on my Facebook site, I've got photos of a Sauvignon Blanc vineyard that died because of all the wine that came out of the winery and sat in the vineyard. At 22 bricks, the vineyard died. Every tank in Chile that had wine in pancaked, because in an 8.8, when everything's doing this, the stainless steel pancaked. The doors then popped open, and of course we had no power, so we couldn't transfer wine from one tank to the next. So all the insurance companies are all down in Chile right now looking at how we're going to fare in an 8.8 earthquake ourselves. And there's two things, obviously. Every winery is going to have a generator, and secondly, all of our tanks are going to have to be in a certain condition to adhere to that. But mainly in the US, we are okay. Okay, the first wine, I've been making wine in Chile since, as I said, 88. So it's been an interesting time for us. The piece that I'm mainly working in is this area up in here. This is called the Aconcagua. The Aconcagua includes Casablanca. Casablanca is a sub-region of the Aconcagua. The next area is Santiago, then we hit Maipo, then we go to Rapel. Rapel is made up of the Cachapol and the Colchagua. The Colchagua River ran red for 3 days during the earthquake. South of Rapel, we get to Curico, and then we get down to Maoli. So all of these regions are quite unique. Now there are three major influences really in Chile. We have obviously is the Andes. This plane flight is amazing, and I do it I do it 8 times a year. I fly Santiago to Mendoza. The plane takes off, it circles 3 times and then flies between the Aconcagua and the Tupangado because we can't get the plane high enough to go over the mountain. So it's a really unique flight if you ever get a chance to do it. So the plane just circles to get high enough and then it goes down. And then the other interesting piece that you don't see is what we call the coastal range. And the coastal range was always very difficult for us because we didn't have any infrastructure to be able to drive or ride our horses over those hills to that area, so it was largely cut off. Now with the new roads, believe it or not, 10% of your tax in Chile goes to a rainy day fund. Even though the earthquake's going to cost $3 billion, Chile government has $2 billion in cash. Tell that to Obama. Hey, you know what, Phil? Maybe that's why George Bush thought Nigeria was out on the coast, because you called them bush vines, and that's why you're not getting much respect down there. Anyway, so the wine you're going to try is from what we call the Aconcagua Coast. So Erasries is one of the original wineries that I started working for. Later, which is the new area, is down here in Maoli. And we go all the way up to Valparaiso being where the rich and famous live, and then we go up to Zapayá. Zapayá is about here. Sorry, I haven't been drinking, so my hand's shaking a little bit. And this wine that you're going to try from the Aconcagua Coast is just inland from Zapayá. It's 7 miles from the coast, and this is one of the new plantings that we've just put in. This is a combination of clone 2 and clone 378, sorry, what am I talking about? Unfortunately, this is the 2008. I don't know. This is what they had in the market, and I didn't have enough of my own inventory of 2009 to bring. So what we're seeing in Chile, a lot of success, unfortunately, for green Sauvignon Blancs is measured by sales in the UK, because they appreciate those wines a little greener than what we do. So the other area from Chilue, Aconcagua Coast here, all the way down to later on the coast, these wines have been cleaning up. They've been beating New Zealand wines in competitions in the UK. So these wines are certainly getting recognition. Here's the vineyard you're trying. These guys are completely freaking crazy. They got I mean, this winery has built 3 wineries in the last 2 years, which are, one of them is like a helix. The winery actually goes through the earth. It looks like a helix, and you can see the tanks. Anyway, another whole story. So this is Sauvignon Blanc. We decided that we'd run an experiment. This vineyard is facing east. So this is southeast all the way through to northeast. This is all Sauvignon Blanc that we planted. And this vineyard, the wine that you're actually trying actually comes a little bit over here to the right, which I didn't put in this slide. But I took this photo in March when I was there. And I had the pick dates on that original slide. But anyway, it's pretty cool. This is a typical cluster of clone 378 that we planted. And this was taken on March 15. And this was actually, we harvested this fruit on March 17th this year. The other thing is, we have, I'm sort of a sarcastic winemaker. The older I get, the more vigor I like. You know, when I was young and enthusiastic, I loved climbing hillsides and getting Cabernet that was that we could pick at 26 bricks and above the valley floor. And I don't know where you guys are in your careers, but I'm finding that I actually like to work more and more with more vigorous benchland sites where we have vigor, where we can push ripeness if we so choose, but at the same time we don't have to deal with senescing, raisening, and all these other sorts of things. Obviously, yeah, a lot of it's tied in with rootstock, but the thing I like about the Aconcagua Coast or the Chilue area is that we have a deeper, more fertile soil, and we can maintain vigor for longer periods of time, and we have more, I want to say more predictable rainfall. And what I find in my career is that, obviously I've made most of my wine in California. What I find in Chile is that Chile almost always represents California, and I think it's a lot to do with the ocean temperatures. When the ocean temperatures, for instance, in 2000, I've got to be careful about my vintage years here. In 2008, the ocean temperature of Seattle was 2 degrees Celsius warmer than average. And that's exactly what we saw off the coast in Conception, which is where we had the earthquake. And so when you have that, you have more uncertainty for climatic conditions. And when we talk about low tonnage, it almost always represents itself in California as well. So what we saw in 2010 in Chile is large cluster counts. It's exactly what we got in California. And we had very poor flowering. We had a lot of wind, and it was cooler. It was a cooler season, and we had a little bit of rain, just enough rain just to knock off the flowers. So even though we had two clusters to 3 clusters, in fact I was in California looking at vineyards this morning, I was at Napa looking at vineyards this morning, I saw a lot of 2s and 3s, and that's exactly what we saw in California this year, in Chile this year. And then we had bad weather during flowering, and actually Sauvignon Blanc this year is off about 10% on average. Cabernet is also slightly off. So we'll see if California gets the same weather pattern as we got in Chile. But in Chile, we're also late too. So we're still harvesting in Chile right now. So my harvest started on February 15 in Argentina, and I'm going to finish on May 15 in Chile. So in the last 2 months, I've been in the 4 countries, and that's why Phil and I have been talking across time zones. The second wine I'm going to show is Geyser Peak. Geyser Peak is run by one of my best friends, Groom, and we're going to show his wine from Australia in a minute. And then, of course, Mick Schroeder, who's the winemaker at Geyser Peak, actually, as up until Friday, he's actually resigned and he's moving wineries for the first time in 17 years. And so I took over running Geyser Peak when Jim Beam merged with Allied Domecq, and so I took over Geyser Peak with Mick Schroeder. So here we are I showed this photo because this is not what we do in New Zealand or Chile. We don't, in my mind, I'm not too worried about laterals, and that's basically what they were pulling here. This is not suckering, this is pulling the laterals. I will sucker around the heads, and there was a comment earlier about cane prune versus spur prune. I only deal in cane prune. Cabernet, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc. If I can cane prune, I'll cane prune everything. I've had enough of spur pruning. It's a lazy man's way. I think there's more work early on in the season, but I think the results are far better. So this is a spur prune vineyard that we have, and we're in there removing laterals. And whereas in New Zealand, when we cane prune, we don't have to move laterals for a start, except around the head. But I actually like laterals because obviously we get more photosynthetic action going on, and I actually like a little bit more canopy cover, especially when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc. And that's a classic example. Well, for me, it's a classic example of what we get for Sauvignon Blanc. This vineyard's in the Russian River. But Geyser Peak has really become sort of the benchmark for. It's a large volume, it's good quality, and it's a pretty freely available product. And I think the wine is an extremely good product for Sauvignon Blanc. We all talk about downy mildew, powdery mildew. Well, in Australia, we've got other problems, mate. And when they're not actually chasing sheep, they're looking at the grasshoppers. Anyway, so actually I put the slide in here because I was trying to send Phil my Aussie slides, and I put this in as the marker slide, but he left it in. Anyway, as long as it's not lamb. So here's a shot Australia, and it looks pretty dry, which is what it is. And the next wine we're going to show you is from this is Groom. Many of you people may know Daryl. Daryl's lived in California about the same length of time I have, and he has a little property in Lenswood in Adelaide Hills. And I actually have, so the Barossa is up here. Well, the Barossa's here. My vineyards are down here in McLaren because actually I grow Shiraz, and then Daryl has his vineyards up in the Adelaide Hills. So that's near Wirrawirra or Petaluma, and I was pretty heavily involved in Petaluma and St. Helens when we were part of Allied Domecq. So anyway, that's where Daryl's vineyard's from. This is actually a photo of Daryl's vineyard, and Adelaide Hills. This is exactly what it's like. In fact, this photo sort of belies really the steepness of these vineyards. These vineyards were planted before hillside ordinances came in Adelaide as well. But this is up in the nearest town is Stirling, and it's a great little wine community as well. But predominantly Sauvignon Blanc, the Chardonnays from this territory are phenomenal, and also growing a fair bit of Pinot Noir as well. But typically, again, we're talking about the acids here are going to be a little bit lower than what we would get in New Zealand or Chile, so it is a little bit warmer. They did not suffer so much with the drought as what they did in the Barossa Valley or McLaren Vale. They had a little bit more water, although in 2007 vintage they were getting a little tight. But the wine that we're showing here today is also Daryl's 2009. Daryl and I are having a little race to see who can get our 2010 into the market first, because we'll have 2010 Sauvignon Blanc on the market by August 1st. In fact, we'll have 2010 Malbec from Argentina on the market by September. So, again, Daryl, pretty much same technique as what we do in New Zealand. 22 to 23 bricks would be our goal. He's going to be picking, these wines are going to be more typically, I don't know what it says in his tech sheet, but he's going to be more typically in juice juice at like 7.2 acid, whereas in New Zealand this year we were at 10. That's just another photo of Daryl's vineyard, but that photo is taken looking east. His vineyard's more typical. His vineyard is more sloping towards the south, and we sort of have. When we think about it in Chile, and that was one of the reasons why we planted the hill like that with that Sauvignon Blanc, we're always, as we go through these new plantings, figuring out how cool can these vineyards be. And if we want to plant Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Gris, God forbid, which slopes are we most interested in? We already know that we want to plant Pinot Noir facing east. So typically, we would plant Sauvignon Blanc, maybe southeast, to try and maintain some of the pyrazine character, or some of the greener characters. Okay, skipping over to New Zealand. Anyone been in New Zealand? Hopefully most of you, except Mike, of course. Oh, a few of you. Okay, it's not too much of a row from Australia. But so literally, I was there on where are we? This is Thursday. I was there on Tuesday. So Marlborough, Nelson is this area here. Martinborough. Don't be confused between Marlborough and Martinborough. Martinborough is just north of Wellington, up in here. And I started my career as an engineer at Canterbury University, which is here. And the way I got into grapes is quite an interest, because I'm actually a viticulturist. I only became a winemaker because I got sick of the winemaker telling me what to do in the vineyard. I'm sure many viticulturists or vineyard managers would relate to that. So, believe it or not, in 1982, when I was working with Danny Schuster and David Jackson, you may have heard of him as well, we were trying to work out how far south we could grow grapes. So my first vintage in 1982 was conducted right here. We grew Ehrenfelser, Breidecker, Flora, and a bunch of other Germanic varietals which you probably never even bothered to hear about anymore. But of course now we grow grapes down here. What a joke. We really didn't know much, did we? So this is where I conducted my first vintages of wine, was in Canterbury. Anyway, I spend most of my time in Marlborough. And this is I always joke with my compatriots in New Zealand, because when you fly into Marlborough, it's really looks like this. It's the same. Everything looks the same. You drive down road after road after road. Everything runs east-west, east-west. Oh, here's one that runs north-south. What a phenomenal event. But anyway, basically it's monoculture. So I'm fairly sarcastic, everyone pulls me apart, but there are three very dramatic different areas, and I show this slide just because this is what Marlborough looks like. We are actually looking, Nelson is over these hills, so we're looking, I'll explain them a little bit in a minute. We're actually standing here in the Brancott. This is one of Montana's vineyards, because obviously with Montana and Stoneleigh, actually, which Mike poured, that was part of Allied to Mac as well, so I used to go down to New Zealand running those wineries as well. This is not my vineyard, this is one of Montana's vineyards. And we are standing here in the Brancott. This is a view of, in fact we go up one. This is a view of the growing degree days, but I just want to point out there's two main, I don't know whether Mike talked about it, this is the Awatiri Valley down here, and this is the Wairau. So Marlborough is firstly, appellations do not exist in New Zealand. Okay? It's a figment if anyone ever tells you that. There is no legal definition for what an appellation is. What we do though is we break up the areas on counties, which counties are fairly large. Marlborough's a fairly large area, but Marlborough includes the Awatiri, includes Ward, and there is another place just further south of Ward where they're also growing Sauvignon Blanc as you drive down the Aconcagua Coast towards Christchurch. Ward is an interesting area. There's no water, so we don't grow much there. There's a big brewery, but that's about it. And through here in the Wairau, you can actually see I can email you this, anyone who wants this, but it basically shows you the different soil types. But just in a nutshell, when you fly in, and the airport's in here somewhere, when you fly in from the Cooks, you come over this way, you come over the Marlborough Sounds, and you land in Blenheim. It's a very interesting flight. I always judge places by the way you fly, because you've got to fly high enough to avoid all the winds of the Cook Strait, because this is very windy here. So the planes fly very high, and then you can always spot the tourists, because the plane does this. Because as it crosses over land, it lands very quickly. So, yeah, it's quite a cool flight. So if you've got a fear of flying, maybe fly to Christchurch and drive up. Anyway, so this is what we call the Brancott on this side, and we call this over here the Ripara. And you always know where you are. In New Zealand, we have to be very simple. If you're standing on these soils, you bend down and you pick up a stone, and it's jaggedy, you're in the Brancott, because they're the glacial soils. If you pick up a stone and it's round, it's a river soil, you're in the Ripara. Very simple. So these are the river soils, these are the glacial soils, and then we break up these regions. We have sub-regions. You can see there are these valleys that run down into the main Wairau River. So this is a mountain range, cross over into Seddon, but this is a mountain range, and these rivers flow into the Wairau, and that's what breaks up the Brancott. The Ripara is pretty simple, except for one little sub-appellation, and Mike may know this better than I do, but there's a little area out here and here that we call Dillon's Point, which is quite a little interesting area, and one of the wines I actually have comes from Dillon's Point out in here, but my other vineyard is up in here in the Omaka. So just to compare, both of these vineyards are clone 2. So we harvested this, I took this photo on April 14th, and we picked this midnight, April 14th. And this is in on the Hawkesbury River. It's in the Omaka, which is a sub-region of the Brancott. I should have taken a closer up photo of the soil so you could have seen the difference. But you can sort of see it here. It has like 3 to 6 inches of loam sitting on top of basically these glacial stones. And the stones are fairly small, but it certainly makes a big difference. And you can see what I mean by monoculture. Everything is vertically trained, cane pruned, and the rows go on for miles. This is my vineyard. I call this the Boulder Bank vineyard. So this is out in Dillon's Point. So that first wine, and the wine that you're trying, the wine that you're going to taste, is the Forefathers, and that's going to give you more of the grapefruit citrus. If you were to try this one, and if you find my wine called Boulder Bank, that's going to give you more of the armpit sweaty character. And that's that vineyard. So again, I didn't show you a true Ripara soil, but trust me, this is all river rock underneath that loam. And here is a typical Ripara soil. And this is my rental car. So that's the key thing about growing Sauvignon Blanc. If you're a winemaker working in 6 countries, is make sure you can drive your rental car between the rows. So you can always do it out of the window, and you can do at least 4 rows in the same time you could walk 1. You guys still awake out there? Do I have to tell you an Aussie joke or something? Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's, you can see obviously dramatic differences between those 3. The other thing that we're doing is, I always laugh about people using the word sustainability. What a bunch of bull. Go on the New Zealand website, you actually have rules and regulations for what sustainability means, and it does not mean recycling your cardboard. Okay? These vineyards have to be grown to a certain set of rules. You can go onto the New Zealand website and you can see what sustainability means. We're actually in the process. I'm heavily involved in the Dameter Association, so I'm heavily involved in organics and biodynamics. And myself, Kim Crawford, Simon Waghorn, the 3 of us, we're involved in the largest biodynamic vineyard in the Southern Hemisphere, and it'll be fully up and running in 2 years. I'm heavily involved in biodynamic vineyards in Chile and Argentina, but in New Zealand, I think we're going to be able to have more success because we actually have a little bit more vigor, but that's another conversation. So I mentioned this already. The 1300 growing degree days is this colour. The 1250 these guys and the 1100. Again, this is work that was done by my friends at Montana, and so is this in terms of the soils for the Wairau. And then this one here shows the average rainfall for the region. And we were very lucky this year. It was a very dry season, and that's why I think this vintage is going to be an incredibly good year. So in looking at the 4 countries that are working, where I've been in the last few months, Argentina, 2009 was a 10 out of 10 vintage, and everyone knows it. It's a phenomenal year. 2010 I would rank as a 9 out of 10 vintage. Obviously, Sauvignon Blanc is a relatively new varietal that we've got going on in Argentina, but we are now planting it up in the Ulco Valley. So if you know where Mendoza is made up of 4 main regions. The Ulco is the highest. That includes La Consulta, Tupungato, and we're planting it up in Tupungato, which is basically where we're planting champagne grapes. And I really think that there's a great home for Sauvignon Blanc up at high altitude, in Tucumán especially, near that river. In Chile, the world is our oyster. Our cost of goods are so low, we can crop these things at a fairly good balance. We can't get the 20 tonne a hectare that we can get in New Zealand, but we can easily get to 12 to 16 tonnes a hectare, and I believe it's still in good balance. And we can get a lot more of the grassy, herbaceous end of the spectrum than we have been planting Sauvignon Vert in Casablanca. Anyway. In New Zealand, I think we're in a situation of good balance. I think that we really need to maintain our vineyards at around about 12 to 14 tonne a hectare. I think if we go too much higher than that, we start to lose concentration. If we go too low, if we go lower than that, I also believe that the wines become a little bit too astringent. So I think we have to be careful. The vintage in New Zealand is a 10 out of 10 for Sauvignon Blanc. 2010 New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, 22 bricks and 10 grams of acid. You just can't repeat those sort of vintages. And it's been an extremely dry year as well. So we were very fortunate. Actually, the only thing that we have to worry about is frost, and we didn't really have frost this year either. And then in Australia, we had a little bit of moisture this year, so in conclusion, I would say that this is probably the best vintage that we've had in Australia since 2005. 2005 was the last good, solid vintage we had before the drought, and I think 2010 we're gradually on our way to recovery, so I'm really looking forward to that. California 2009 was a very difficult year. I think that we're all up against it, especially with our friends in the press that have, as soon as there's any sort of little bit of doubt about anything, of course, they're willing to write the vintage off. So I think we need to be very cautious about that. But how do we compete globally? How are we going to make our Sauvignon Blanc in California compete against what can be grown in New Zealand and especially Chile? And I think what we have to do is sell where we're from. We either have to sell it as Lake County, we have to sell it as Sonoma County, and really put the emphasis on, wines of a place. And we are here, and we are doing this, and we are great because we just can't compete when it comes to price. That's not going to happen. So anyway, that's sort of what I had to say. I will just finish with style versus quality. Phil touched on that for a minute. For me, quality is non-negotiable. I think quality, our goal as winemakers and viticulturists is to continue to increase quality every year, whether it becomes more varietal, more distinctive, having the wines be balanced, not astringent at all. But when it comes to style, I think that's really what we as Californians have to work on to make ourselves distinctive from everybody else. Just because New Zealand currently is having, or Chile currently is having a great resurgence in the Vene Verde style of Sauvignon Blanc does not necessarily mean that the American consumer likes that. I think American consumers, when it comes to Sauvignon Blanc, like more grapefruit. They like more citrus. I think that they like to have their wines a little bit more in the subliminal tropical end. I don't think that we can drink battery acid every day. So that's sort of where I come from. And when we go into these places and making wines distinctive for each particular country, it's very easy for us to go in as California winemakers, and especially when varietals like Cabernet and Merlot, and go out there and pick things at 25 bricks, 28 bricks. When we do that, we're removing, I agree with the comment that we're removing terroir. I think that we're making wines that are too similar. We need to be making, particularly with Sauvignon Blanc, we need to be making Sauvignon Blanc at 22 bricks, 23 bricks, and really letting the vineyards show its diversity and its difference to when it comes to competing on the world market. So anyway, I appreciate your time. I appreciate obviously working with Phil on this project and the beauty of the internet. And if you've got any questions, I'm sure Phil and I would be happy to take them.